They laughed when a broke single mom bought an abandoned stone tower for $2,800. But when her daughter stopped coughing the second they stepped inside, she realized the mountain wasn't just keeping secrets, it was listening. Then, then the sheriff showed up claiming it was Whitford land. The brake lines on her truck got cut, and her child started sleepwalking toward a locked iron door that breathed. What they found inside changed everything. Civil War gold, a bloodline buried for a century, and metal that could bend light itself. By the time the snow melted, the tower wasn't a ruin anymore. It was alive. Stay till the end, because once you see what the mountain does to those who try to steal its heart, you'll never forget it. Blackthorn Knob, late November. The first hard frost came down like ground glass over the ridge. The air had that thin metallic bite that meant winter was moving in for good, and Mae Jenkins could feel it in her bones before the sun even came up. The space heater had died sometime after midnight, leaving the trailer colder than a meat locker. She woke to the sound of her daughter coughing again, dry, sharp, and endless, like it wanted to tear her lungs out from the inside. "Easy, baby," she whispered, pulling the quilt tighter around Lila's small shoulders. The girl's skin was pale and damp, her breath a wheeze. The walls around them were black-spotted with mold no amount of bleach could kill. She'd scrubbed until her hands cracked open, but the rot always came back, crawling up from the seams, like the place itself wanted them gone. At the county clinic, the doctor hadn't even looked up from his clipboard when he said it. "You need to get her out of there, or you're going to lose her. Get her out." Like it was that simple. Sarah worked 3 jobs and still couldn't scrape together enough to rent a new place. The only thing she owned was a busted Ford with a leaky radiator and a coffee can of cash she and Lila had been saving for years, a college jar that sat on top of the fridge. Every tip, every overtime dollar, every penny found under couch cushions went into it. $2,800. That night, she sat at the tiny kitchen table long after Lila had fallen asleep, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound. Her hands were shaking. The jar was in front of her, the cash neatly rolled and rubber banded. If she spent it, there'd be no going back. But if she didn't, there might not be a future to save for. Sometime after 3 in the morning, she pulled out her phone and scrolled through the local barter app, mostly junk, busted tractors, dogs needing homes, old tools, hand-me-down furniture. Then a listing caught her eye. 1890s stone signal tower, $2,800 cash, as is, no questions. The photo was grainy, taken at dusk. A crooked stone tower standing alone on a ridge, a rusted wind vane spinning above it, the light in its window the color of dying fire. She stared at it for a long time, her heart pounding. Something about it felt waiting. By dawn, she'd loaded everything she could fit into the pickup, 2 duffel bags, a mattress, a space heater that might work again if it felt like it, and told Lila they were going for a drive. The road to Blackthorn Knob wound higher than she expected, a vein of gravel climbing through pines silvered with frost. The sky hung low, purple and bruised, spitting bits of snow. Lila pressed her face to the window, tracing fog circles with her finger. "Where are we going, Mama?" "Someplace dry," Sarah said, forcing a smile. At the top of the ridge stood the tower, a 60-foot column of granite, scarred by time and wind, and a little cottage slumped beside it like a tired old dog guarding its master. Miss Eula Whitford was waiting on the porch of a rust-eaten Cadillac, a cigarette between fingers as thin as kindling. 78 if she was a day, wearing a fur coat that might have been real back when Nixon was president. "You the one messaged about the tower?" she rasped. "Yes, ma'am." Eula squinted, smoke curling from her lips. "You got cash?" Sarah pulled the envelope from her jacket. Eula counted every bill twice, then shoved a yellow deed and a skeleton key into her palm. "That's it?" Sarah asked. "No contract? No inspection?" Eula barked a laugh that sounded like gravel in a blender. "Sweetheart, for $2,800, you ain't buying a home. You're buying a headache." She flicked ash into the snow and turned for her car. "It's yours now, girl. You deal with it." Sarah stood in the cold watching the old Cadillac rattle down the hill until the sound vanished into the trees. For a moment, it was just her and the tower and the wind. She unlocked the cottage door. The hinges screamed. Inside, the air smelled of dust and iron and something faintly electric, like rain about to break. The walls leaned. The floor sagged. The old stove looked like it hadn't burned a log since Roosevelt was in office. But when Lila stepped across the threshold, something happened. She stopped coughing. "Breathe in for me, honey," Sarah whispered. Lila inhaled once, then again. Smooth, clear, no wheeze, no rattle. Sarah dropped to her knees and covered her face with her hands. The sob came out before she could stop it. "Thank you," she whispered, "to God, to fate, to whoever had left that listing online at 3 a.m. Thank you." She didn't know if she had just saved her daughter's life or stepped into the kind of story that never ends well for women like her. That night, they lit a fire in the stove. It smoked and coughed, but eventually caught. The wind outside howled through the cracks like something alive, and the tower groaned against it. When Sarah closed her eyes, she could have sworn she heard it breathing back. The stars outside the window hung low and cold, the ridge glittering like broken glass. Lila slept soundly for the first time in months. Sarah sat awake by the window, the skeleton key heavy in her palm, the deed on the table under the lamp. The place had a name burned into the header, the Hollow Light. She ran her thumb over the words. They felt carved instead of printed. Outside, the wind shifted, and for a split second she saw a flicker of blue light at the top of the tower, faint as a ghost lantern. She told herself it was just reflection. She was wrong. They moved in with whatever fit in the bed of the truck. 2 mattresses, 1 cracked lamp, a coffee can of nails, and the kind of hope that only people with nothing left seem to carry. No power yet. No heat, except what the old wood stove decided to give. Sarah stacked logs until her shoulders burned, then built a fire that smoked like it was learning how to live again. The tower loomed above them, 60 feet of Civil War stone, thick and stubborn, defying time itself. Its windows were black and blind, but somehow it still felt aware, like an animal resting with one eye open. The cottage, though small, was full of corners that didn't seem right. The kitchen slanted slightly downhill, and the ceiling beams bowed like they were tired of holding up the years. Yet it wasn't the shape that unsettled Sarah. It was the feeling. She could swear the place was listening. Every step she took came back to her in a slow echo. Every breath seemed to stir dust that had been waiting centuries to move. The first night, Lila built a fort out of blankets in front of the stove. She laughed when sparks snapped in the flue, said it sounded like the house was talking. Sarah smiled, but couldn't shake the thought that maybe her daughter was right. On the 3rd day, she found the first secret. She was sweeping the kitchen when her broom snagged on a loose hearthstone near the stove. She knelt down, pried it up with the claw end of a hammer, and froze. Beneath the stone was a rusted tin box, no bigger than a loaf of bread. Inside, wrapped in brittle cloth, lay a handful of old coins. Thick, heavy, stamped with the eagle crest of the Confederacy. Civil War gold. She turned one over in her hand. It was tarnished, but the date still showed clear, 1864. She didn't tell Lila. Not yet. That same evening, while unpacking a few plates into the old wooden pie safe, she noticed the back panel was uneven. When she pushed against it, the board shifted just enough to reveal a narrow hollow. She reached in and pulled out a bundle of papers tied with a faded blue ribbon. Letters. Dozens of them. She sat at the table, lantern light trembling across the page, and began to read. The handwriting was elegant but hurried, the ink browned with age. "My dearest Adeline," one began, "if you find this, the mountain has done as promised. It has kept what men could not steal. I can hear their dogs on the ridge. The Whitfords know now. I pray our bloodline is clever enough to hide, strong enough to remember." Each letter carried the same signature. Captain Elias Ashwood, 1864. The name rattled around in her chest like a coin in a jar. Ashwood. She whispered it under her breath, and it felt like saying a prayer she had forgotten. After Lila fell asleep, Sarah went exploring with a flashlight. She followed the narrow stairway that spiraled up inside the tower, each step groaning under her weight. The air changed as she climbed, cooler, sharper, filled with the scent of iron and dust. At the halfway point, she paused to catch her breath. Her light swept across a support beam where something had been carved into the wood. The letters were small, rough, and childish, but still readable. "Ashwood blood turns the key." She touched the words and felt her stomach drop. Her mother's maiden name, before foster care, before social workers, before she aged out of the system at 17, had been Ashwood. She had never thought much about it, just another old Southern name lost to time and poverty. But here it was, carved into the bones of a house that should not know her. For a long moment, she stood there in the cold, dark stairwell, the flashlight trembling in her hand. "Who are you?" she whispered to the walls. The wind outside howled in answer. Over the next few days, the tower began to feel alive. Doors swelled shut and opened by themselves. The wood stove flared when she walked past, even when she had not stoked it. At night, she could hear faint humming through the stone, like the deep-throated murmur of a river under ice. Lila was adapting faster than she was. The girl seemed lighter, her cough nearly gone. She spent her afternoons drawing pictures of the tower, her small fingers smudged with charcoal. "Look, Mama," she said one morning, holding up a sketch. "That's the lady who used to live here. She said the mountain keeps secrets." Sarah froze. "Who told you that?" "The lady in the blue dress," Lila said simply, as if that explained everything. "She hums when the wind blows." Sarah smiled, the way mothers do when they do not want to show fear. But inside, something twisted. That night, she reread the letters, tracing every stroke of ink like she was trying to feel the pulse of the man who had written them. There was a line she kept coming back to, one that made her skin crawl and her heart ache at the same time. "The mountain will keep what men cannot steal." By the seventh day, Sarah stopped trying to tell herself the place was normal. When she lay in bed, she could hear the house breathe. Not creak. Breathe. The rhythm of wood expanding, contracting, sighing in the cold. Sometimes it matched her own heartbeat. It was not haunted exactly, not in the way movies made it. It was something older, something watching. And then one morning, as she opened the curtains to let in the thin winter light, she saw tracks in the snow outside the back door. Bare footprints, small, child-sized, leading up to the tower steps and stopping halfway like whoever made them had simply vanished. She called out for Lila, but her daughter was still asleep, bundled in her blanket fort, mouth open, dreaming. Sarah shut the curtain, locked the door, and sat on the floor until her hands stopped shaking. She knew, deep down, this house had not simply ended up with her. She had not found it by luck. It had found her. Which meant one other thing she could not ignore anymore. If the mountain had waited this long for her to arrive, then there were people somewhere out there who were waiting for her too. And not all of them would come knocking as kindly as Miss Eula Whitford. The hollow light had chosen her. Now she just had to figure out why. By the second week, the ridge had turned to ice and wind. Every tree groaned under the weight of winter, and every morning Sarah had to hammer the truck door open just to start it. She was tired, running on diner coffee and the thin thrill of survival. But something inside her, something older than fear, was waking up. The gold coins were hidden under the bed now, wrapped in a pillowcase. The letters sat in a neat pile on the table, still smelling faintly of ash and cedar. But it was the tower that held her attention most nights. It loomed above the cottage like a patient giant, its narrow windows glowing faintly whenever the moon hit just right. She could not explain it, but she felt drawn to it, as if it remembered her before she'd ever arrived. Power was the next battle. She pawned the only valuable thing she had left, a thin silver ring from a marriage that never really happened. He had promised her forever and left before spring. The pawn shop gave her $60, enough to pay the deposit at the co-op. 2 days later, a crew truck groaned up the hill and hooked the tower to the grid. When the lights flickered on that night, they stuttered like nervous fireflies. Shadows swam across the walls in uncertain rhythms. The wiring hummed faintly, and Sarah could swear the hum matched the slow, steady beat of her heart. At the top of the spiral staircase, she found the door. It was iron, built into the stone itself. No knob, no keyhole, no latch, just a solid slab etched with faint geometric lines that shimmered when her flashlight passed over them. It looked less like something made by men and more like something grown out of the rock. She ran her fingers along the surface. It was cold, smooth, unyielding. Behind her, the tower sighed. Lila was having restless nights again. She mumbled in her sleep, words Sarah could not understand. On the 5th night after the lights came back, Sarah woke to find her daughter's bed empty. The door to the stairwell stood open, a thin trail of cold air leaking through it. "Lila?" No answer. Her bare feet slapped against the wooden floor as she ran up the spiral stairs, heart pounding with every creak. Halfway up, she heard it, a sound so soft it almost wasn't sound at all. A hum, childlike and clear, echoing up the stone. When she reached the top, she stopped dead. Lila stood before the iron door, her nightgown glowing pale in the moonlight that filtered through the tower slit. Her small hand was pressed against the center of the door, where one of those geometric lines formed the shape of a seven-pointed star. "Lila, honey, step back," Sarah whispered, afraid to startle her. But Lila didn't move. Her eyes were half closed, her lips moving faintly, like she was answering someone Sarah couldn't see. Then Sarah saw it, a faint red bead blooming at the edge of her daughter's thumb. Blood. Lila. Before she could reach her, the door exhaled. There was no mistaking it. A slow, low breath of warm air rolled out into the cold stairwell, carrying the scent of copper and rain. The iron surface rippled like heat on asphalt. Then, with a deep groan, it opened. Inside lay a round chamber no wider than 20 feet. Every inch of the curved walls was lined in polished copper that caught the lantern light and threw it back like 1,000 tiny suns. Star maps were engraved across the metal, constellations that seemed both familiar and wrong, like the sky had been rearranged by hand. In the center stood an antique telescope, its brass spine gleaming, but it was not aimed at the heavens. Through the narrow observation slit, its lens pointed downward toward a hollow on the opposite ridge, a valley that didn't exist on any map Sarah knew. Lila blinked awake fully then, confusion flickering through her eyes. "Mama? Did I?" "It's all right, baby," Sarah said, though her voice shook. "You're okay." On a pedestal near the telescope rested a single object, a leather-bound journal, edges burned, its clasp sealed with what looked like dried blood. The air in the room felt alive around it, buzzing, vibrating just enough to make Sarah's skin prickle. She hesitated, then opened it. The paper inside was yellowed and fragile. The handwriting was elegant, slanted, and angry. November 11th, 1899. "The vein of star iron runs beneath the ridge. Whitfords will kill for it. Hide the children. Trust the hollow." The entry was signed, Adeline Ashwood. Sarah traced the signature with a trembling finger. Her throat tightened. Ashwood. That name again. The one carved into the beam. The one that lived in her blood. She read the next line scrawled in the margin, written in a different ink, darker, wetter, like someone had written it in a hurry. "It listens. Do not let them break it open. Once it breathes, it remembers." The journal pulsed faintly under her palm, warm, rhythmic, like a living heartbeat. She dropped it in shock. When it hit the floor, a thin echo rang out through the copper walls, soft as a bell, but it kept going, repeating itself in fading whispers until it died in the stone. Lila clung to her leg. "Mama, I think she's talking again." Sarah didn't answer. She stared at the telescope, then at the carved constellations. She recognized Orion, but it was upside down. The North Star wasn't north. The map showed a sky turned backward, like whoever drew them wasn't looking up, but looking out from somewhere inside the earth. She picked up the journal again and closed it carefully. The air had gone colder. The doorway behind them began to hum, that same strange vibration the floorboards carried at night. Sarah took Lila's hand. "We're going downstairs." As they stepped out, the door swung shut on its own. The metal sealed silently, leaving no trace of hinges, no seam, no sound, only the faint smell of iron and the ghost of Adeline's warning echoing in Sarah's head. Hide the children. Trust the hollow. She didn't know what star iron was. She didn't know who Adeline had been. But she knew one thing for certain. Somebody had bled to write those words, and if the Whitfords were still out there, someone might bleed again. Outside, snow began to fall in heavy, silent sheets, blanketing the ridge in white. The power flickered once, twice, then steadied. Down in the cottage, the fire snapped alive as if answering a call. Sarah held her daughter close, staring at the tower through the window. Its topmost slit glowed faintly blue again, breathing slow and steady against the night. The mountain was waking up, and now it knew her name. December came hard that year. Gray sky, frozen mud, and a silence that carried weight. On Blackthorn Knob, the air never really got warm again after sunrise. The tower loomed over the ridge like a monument to something long buried, and Sarah Mae Jenkins had started to feel like part of it. Cold, steady, cracked, but still standing. She had not heard a car up the mountain in nearly 2 weeks. Most people avoided the ridge. Locals said the hollow light was haunted or cursed, depending on who you asked. Sarah liked it that way. Out here, quiet was safety. Quiet meant nobody could take what little piece she had managed to build. That changed on the morning of December 1st. The sound came up the road slow at first, a low, throaty rumble that did not belong to her old pickup. Tires crunching gravel, a radio playing faint country gospel. Then a horn tap, polite but sharp. Sarah stepped out onto the porch, coat zipped up to her chin, a white county-issued SUV idled at the foot of the path. The door opened, and out stepped Sheriff Boone Whitford, broad-shouldered, clean-shaven, the kind of man who could smile and sneer at the same time. His badge gleamed brighter than it needed to. "Mornin', Miss Jenkins," he said, his voice smooth as syrup over a knife. She didn't answer, just folded her arms. Boone rested one boot on the bottom step, tipping his hat. "Heard you been fixing up the old signal tower. Fine piece of history you got here." "I bought it fair," she said. He smiled wider. "Oh, I don't doubt you did. Problem is that their tower sits on mineral rights belonging to my family. Been that way since 1892. Guess you weren't told." Sarah's jaw tightened. "I've got the deed." He chuckled, low and condescending. "Paper don't mean much when the ground under it's been spoken for, sweetheart. That's how things work in these parts." He said sweetheart like a warning. Behind him, one of his deputies, young, thick-necked, eyes too alert, pretended to check the tire but kept glancing toward her truck. She caught it immediately. He was circling, looking for something. Maybe the license plate, maybe the VIN, maybe a reason to say she did not belong here. "What is it you want, Sheriff?" He adjusted his belt, that fake smile never fading. "Just making sure you understand the situation. Would hate to see a nice lady like you get herself in trouble come winter." She stepped closer, her voice steady. "This land's mine. You can take your threats and drive back down before I decide to make coffee and waste more of your morning." For a split second, his eyes hardened, the good old boy mask slipping just enough to show the man underneath, the one used to being obeyed. Then he tipped his hat again, smirked, and turned for his car. "Well now," he drawled, "you just holler if you need help. Roads up here get slick, and that's no place for a little girl and her mama to be stranded." He paused, looked up at the tower. "Funny thing, though, been in my family 100 years, and that light's never worked. But folks in town say they've seen it glowing again. You wouldn't know anything about that, would you?" Sarah's throat went dry. She forced a shrug. "Probably reflection. Metal up top." "Sure," he said softly. "Reflection." He slid into the SUV, waved like an old friend, and rolled down the hill, gravel spitting behind his tires. Sarah stood there until the sound faded. The wind picked up again, rattling the tin roof. She went back inside, locked the door, and double-bolted it. That night, the ridge felt different. The air was too still. Even the coyotes were quiet. When she checked the truck before dawn the next morning, she saw it. The brake line sliced halfway through, one more hard stop away from disaster. The cut was clean, deliberate. She sat down on the frozen dirt beside it, heart hammering, hands shaking. Not because she was scared, she was past that, but because she knew exactly what this meant. This wasn't about property. This was extraction. Boone thought she had found something valuable in that tower. Gold, relics, secrets. Whatever it was, he wanted it, and he wanted her gone before Christmas. She could almost hear his voice in her head, that easy drawl. "Would hate to see you get yourself in trouble." Sarah had been scared every day of her adult life. Scared of eviction notices, of hospital bills, of men who smiled like they meant it. She had lived through worse than this. She tightened the bolts, cleaned the knife mark from the pipe, and drove into town for brake fluid and groceries. Boone's cruiser was parked outside the diner when she arrived. He looked up from his coffee as she walked past, tipping his hat again, that same damn grin on his face. She did not flinch. When she came back out, her grocery bags heavy with canned goods, a folded flyer sat under her windshield wiper. Community Mineral Survey, Whitford Holdings, December 24. The message was clear. He planned to come back. He planned to make this official. Driving home, Sarah watched the ridge rise in the rearview mirror. The tower stood against the sky, a black silhouette crowned with faint blue light. When she pulled into the drive, Lila was waiting on the porch, bundled in her coat, cheeks flushed red. "Mama, there was a man here," she said quietly. "He asked if the mountain still sings." Sarah froze. "What did you say?" "I told him no," Lila whispered, "but I think it lied." That night, the wind hit the tower hard enough to shake the windows. The fire in the stove flared on its own, blue for a heartbeat before settling back to orange. Sarah sat up until morning, shotgun across her lap, the journal from Adeline open beside her. She read the line again and again, the ink faded but furious. Whitfords will kill for it. The mountain seemed to echo the words, a slow, deep rumble that she felt through the soles of her feet. Sarah poured herself a cup of cold coffee and looked out the window toward the ridge where the first hints of dawn were touching the stone. She whispered, not in prayer but in defiance, "You picked the wrong woman to scare." And somewhere deep in the tower, the old iron door gave a single low groan, almost like agreement. The storm rolled down from the ridge like an army. By dusk, it had swallowed the sky. Wind clawed through the pines, shaking loose needles that hissed across the roof. Power lines sagged under ice. By midnight, every road in or out of Blackthorn Knob was gone, buried under snow and fallen branches. Sarah stacked logs in the stove, listening to the creak of the tower above. The storm sounded alive, breathing around the walls like some great animal circling its den. Lila lay bundled under blankets near the hearth, her skin pale but peaceful. The lights flickered twice, then died. Outside, the mountain groaned. The ridge had a way of talking when storms came, deep, distant cracks like voices from under the earth. Sarah sat by the fire, trying not to think about the Whitfords or Boone's warning or the brake line. She told herself the wind was just wind. But in the quiet moments between gusts, she swore she could hear something else. A hum. Low, steady, like a heartbeat buried deep in the ground. Around 3 a.m, she woke to soft footsteps. Lila? Her daughter stood by the door in her nightgown, barefoot, eyes open but empty. She was whispering something over and over. "Mama, she says, come downstairs. Please come." Sarah's stomach went cold. "Baby, it's too cold. Let's go back to bed." But Lila turned and walked toward the cellar door, the same one Sarah had avoided since moving in. The latch clicked open on its own. Sarah grabbed a flashlight and followed, her breath fogging in the air. The narrow stairwell smelled of damp earth and rust. The beam of light trembled against the walls, revealing shelves of old jars, a few tools, nothing unusual until she saw the back wall. It wasn't wood, it was metal. A smooth panel of dull silver set into the dirt, etched with lines that shimmered faintly blue. At its center, a 7-pointed star. Lila stepped forward, still sleepwalking, still whispering. She laid her small hand against the center of the star. The blue lines brightened instantly, running down her arm in faint, glowing veins. The air filled with a sound like wind through a pipe organ, low, mournful, alive. "Lila!" Sarah pulled her back, but it was too late. The wall shuddered. A deep grinding echoed through the cellar. The earth shook beneath their feet. Then the wall opened. Not swung, split. Cold air rushed out, sharp and metallic, like the breath of something waking after a long sleep. The space beyond glowed faintly blue. Sarah raised the flashlight and stepped inside. What she saw didn't make sense. It was a chamber carved directly into the rock, lined with crates stacked floor to ceiling. The wood was dark, petrified with age. The nearest crate had cracked open, revealing something inside. Metal, but not any metal she had ever seen. Each ingot shimmered as though lit from within, veins of light pulsing slow and rhythmic. The surface bent the light around it, making the air ripple like heat above asphalt. When she reached out, she could feel the hum in her bones. Star iron. The word came unbidden from somewhere in her memory. Adeline's journal. The vein of star iron runs beneath the ridge. Lila's voice trembled. "Mama, it sings." Sarah swallowed hard. "Don't touch it." She knelt by one of the crates. Inside were markings burned into the wood, an A shaped like a tree, roots reaching down, branches spreading wide. Beneath it, Ashwood trusts the hollow. Her flashlight flickered. The glow from the metal brightened in rhythm with her pulse. She could feel it in her teeth now, like static before lightning. She opened another crate. Same ingots, same light, same sound. The deeper she looked, the more she found, rows of them, maybe hundreds, each one radiating that low hum that seemed to seep straight into her chest. Sarah pressed a hand against her sternum. Her heartbeat felt doubled, hers and the mountains. According to Adeline's notes, this metal amplified second sight, the Ashwood gift. Sarah didn't know what that meant exactly, but she could feel it now. The pull, the vibration in the air, the way the shadows bent along the edges of the crates. Lila reached for one, and the glow brightened instantly, casting her face in cold blue. "Stop!" Sarah grabbed her hand. "It's not safe." Lila blinked, confused, as if waking from a dream, but she said it belongs to us. Sarah looked back toward the stairs. The doorway was gone, closed somehow, sealed again behind them. Panic rose in her throat, but then the hum shifted, softer now, almost kind. "It's alive," she whispered. "It's listening." The air smelled of iron and ozone. She could taste it on her tongue. When she found the handle again, the wall gave way easily, as if allowing them to leave. They stumbled back into the cellar, gasping. The door sealed behind them, the lines fading from blue to dull gray. Sarah locked the cellar door and backed away, pulling Lila close. "What you saw down there," she said quietly. "You can't tell anyone. Not about the metal. Not about the light. Nothing." Lila nodded, eyes wide. "Is it bad?" Sarah hesitated. She thought of Boone, of Eula's quick sale, of the journal's warning. "It depends who holds it," she said finally. "To them, it's a fortune. To us." She looked toward the tower window. The storm had calmed, but the ridge glowed faintly, as if light was rising through the soil. It might be something holy. She tucked Lila into bed and sat awake by the stove until dawn, the hum still echoing faintly in her teeth. Now she understood why Eula had sold so fast, why Boone had come smiling with his lies. They all knew. They had been waiting for someone with the blood to open it. Sarah realized then she and her daughter were living on top of a weapon, or a miracle. And in a place like this, there was no real difference between the two. Word spreads. It always does. By the second week of December, the mountain was no longer quiet. Truck tires left new tracks in the snow. Footprints showed up at the edge of the ridge and vanished again. The mail never came. But somehow, Sarah started getting notes slipped under her door. Scraps of paper that said things like, "You do not belong here," or "Leave it buried." She burned them all in the wood stove. Still, the air changed. She could feel it in her chest, that thick tension that comes right before something bad happens. It was on a Thursday when Jasper Flint showed up. He came climbing up the ridge with a six-pack of local moonshine, a flannel shirt too clean to be real, and a smile he must have practiced in the mirror. His truck was new, tires too wide for mountain roads, bumper plastered with stickers that said things like "Dig Deep" and "Treasure Trackers Podcast." Sarah met him halfway down the path, shotgun visible but not raised. "Afternoon, ma'am," he said, doffing his cap. "Name's Jasper Flint. I run a little show online, history, folklore, that sort of thing. Folks down in Blackthorn told me you've got yourself quite a story up here." "Not for sale," she said. He laughed easily, flashing that practiced grin. "I get it, believe me. You got people coming out of the woodwork, making you nervous. Can't say I blame you, but I'm not one of them bad ones, Miss Jenkins. I just want to talk. Maybe film a piece. 10 grand up front just to walk the grounds and get your blessing." He held out a crisp envelope. $10,000. Real cash. Sarah didn't even look at it. "History don't need a camera," she said. He studied her face a long moment. Then he smiled again, slower this time, like he'd seen what he needed. "Well now, I can see you're the careful kind. That's good. Careful folks live longer." She didn't answer. "Mind if I take a quick look from the road? My audience loves old towers." "Nothing dangerous." She stepped closer until they were almost nose to nose. "You take one step past that fence, and I'll put a hole in your radiator big enough to drive through." Jasper's grin didn't fade, but his eyes turned colder. "No need for that kind of talk, ma'am. I was just being neighborly." He turned and walked back toward his truck. Before getting in, he called over his shoulder, "Careful what you keep up here, Miss Jenkins. Some treasures ain't meant to stay found." He drove off slow, letting his tires spin just enough to spray slush at her boots. That night, the storm came again, fast, mean, full of sleet that rattled against the windows. Sarah had just banked the fire when she heard a whirring sound outside, faint but steady. She stepped to the window and saw it, a small drone hovering in the snow, red light blinking like a pulse. "God damn it," she whispered. The thing buzzed closer, hovering at eye level, camera glinting. Then, just as she reached for the shotgun, it veered sideways and smashed straight through the kitchen window. Glass exploded inward. The drone hit the table and spun out, almost tangled in the curtain. A brick clattered beside it, tied with a note in red marker, "Leave or burn." She stood there breathing hard, glass crunching under her bare feet. Then she picked up the brick, walked to the stove, and dropped the note into the flames. "Not this time," she said quietly. "Not ever again." By morning, she made her choice. Lila was getting worse. Not sick, but different. She woke up muttering things Sarah couldn't understand. Sometimes she stared at the tower's walls like she could see through them. She said she dreamed of a woman in a long dress standing in the snow, whispering, "Hide the children. Trust the hollow." Sarah knew it was time to get her out. She packed Lila's bag, kissed her forehead, and drove 40 miles down the mountain to Granny Ruth's, her old foster mother, the only steady soul she had ever trusted. Ruth's house smelled like soap and tobacco and something warm from the oven. "You're pale, girl," Ruth said, pulling her in for a hug. "What's going on up there?" "Just some noise. I need her safe for a few days." Ruth looked at her like she knew there was more. "You finally found it, didn't you? Whatever your blood's been dragging you toward." Sarah stiffened. "What do you mean?" But Ruth just smiled, that sad mountain smile. "You can't run from what you're made of, honey, but you can sure as hell fight for it." Sarah left before she cried. Back at the tower, the silence felt thicker. The air smelled faintly of iron and storm. She went straight upstairs to the room behind the iron door. The journal was waiting for her on the pedestal, its pages half open, and beside it something new she hadn't noticed before, a small locket, tarnished gold, chain broken. It was cold when she picked it up, but it warmed in her hand almost instantly. The clasp caught her thumb, drawing a drop of blood. She hissed, and then it happened. Everything hit her at once, visions flooding through her like lightning down a wire. She saw Adeline Ashwood in the same tower, candlelight flickering across her face, belly heavy with child. A winter night. A man pounding on the door, shouts outside, Whitford voices. Then another image. Adeline kneeling beside a crib, twin babies wrapped in quilts. One she kissed on the forehead and whispered to. The other she passed to a man waiting by the back door. "Take her down the mountain," Adeline said. "Give her another name. The Whitfords can't find them both." Gunfire, screams, firelight on stone. The vision twisted again. Whitford men dragging Ashwood women into wagons, their faces hidden under burlap sacks. Men with torches digging into the ridge, searching for veins of glowing metal. Then came a whisper, clear and bright as a bell. "When the hollow light burns blue, the lost child returns, and the mountain chooses sides." Sarah gasped, dropping the locket. Her knees hit the floor. The hum of star iron filled her ears, vibrating through the walls. She understood. She was the lost child, the one sent down the mountain generations ago under a different name. Adeline's blood flowed in her veins, and the Whitfords had been hunting her family ever since. And Lila, sweet, stubborn Lila, was next. This wasn't a feud. It was a blood war. The storm outside cracked open with thunder, shaking the tower from base to crown. Blue light flared through the windows like lightning trapped in glass. Sarah stood in that glow, fists clenched, heart hammering. The fear that had followed her all her life burned away, leaving only fire. They wanted a fight. Now she finally understood what she was fighting for. Christmas Eve arrived like a lie, quiet, bitterly cold, and far too still. The ridge glittered under a crust of ice, every pine bowing beneath white weight. The roads were glass, the power lines hummed low. Sarah Mae Jenkins hadn't seen another soul in days, and that suited her just fine. She only needed one errand to get medicine for Lila's cough. The trip to town should have taken an hour. It took 4. The roads were half buried, the wind slicing sideways through the defroster vents. She drove slow, hands stiff around the wheel, keeping to the narrow ribbons of tire tracks that still cut through the snow. Every mile down felt like leaving the world she'd known for another, older one that didn't want her back. When she reached Blackthorn, most of the town was shut down. Christmas lights blinked weakly from gas stations and front porches, their colors dull in the gray daylight. The pharmacy clerk barely looked up when Sarah slid the bottle of cough syrup and antibiotics across the counter. "You come down from the ridge?" he asked, bagging the medicine. She nodded. "Storm's getting worse tonight. Wouldn't linger. I don't plan to." By the time she turned back toward the mountain, dusk had already settled. The clouds hung so low it felt like she was driving into the belly of something breathing. Halfway up, she smelled it, smoke. Not the distant, drifting kind from someone's chimney, but thick, oily, wrong. Her foot hit the gas. The truck fishtailed on the frozen road, the engine howling as she climbed. The smoke grew denser, darker, until it coated the windshield like fog. Then, through the swirling haze, she saw it. Where her cottage had stood was nothing but black bone and flame. She slammed the truck into park and ran. The heat slapped her in the face, searing through her coat. Embers rained from the skeletal rafters, hissing in the snow. Her throat locked. "Lila!" There was no answer. She stumbled toward what had been the kitchen, falling to her knees in the soot. The ground was too hot to touch. A voice behind her said, calm as winter, "Fire crews couldn't make it up the ridge." She spun around. Boone Whitford stood at the edge of the ruins, breath steaming in the cold, hat pulled low against the wind. He looked cleaner than anyone had a right to in this ash, uniform pressed, boots spotless. "You," Sarah breathed. He gave a slow shrug. "Storm's a bitch. Roads iced solid. Shame about the house. But lucky you, that tower didn't catch." She followed his gaze. The stone tower rose untouched above the smoke, its windows black, its top lens glowing faintly, cold, unearthly blue. Every instinct in her screamed to run toward it. "Where is she?" Sarah demanded. Boone smiled, that same lazy, poisonous smile he wore the first time they met. "She's fine, sweetheart. Safer than she's ever been." Sarah's vision narrowed. "If you've hurt her." He cut her off. "I ain't the one that hurt her. You brought her here. You opened what should have stayed buried." He pulled a pistol from his belt and checked the cylinder with a casual click. "You and me, we're going to finish what our family started." She didn't think. She just ran. The climb up the tower stairs felt endless. The air inside shimmered with cold light, each step vibrating underfoot as if the stone were alive. The hum she'd heard in the cellar was back, louder now, filling the air with a pulse she could feel in her bones. "Lila!" Her voice echoed off the walls. When she reached the top, she found them. Lila stood near the telescope, tears streaking her soot-stained face. Boone held her by the arm, pistol pressed against her temple. The blue light from the ceiling lens painted them both ghostly. "Open the vein," Boone said. "Use the little witch, or you watch her bleed out on your boots." Sarah froze, breath sharp and ragged. "Let her go. She's a child." "She's a key," he said simply, "and you're the blood that turns it." He motioned toward the control plate on the floor, an intricate pattern of iron and copper shaped like a seven-pointed star. The surface pulsed faintly, same as the metal in the cellar. "I don't know how," she said. He smiled. "You will." Lila whimpered. "Mama." Sarah's hand twitched toward her coat pocket, toward the knife she'd carried since the brake line warning. Boone noticed. "Careful now," he said. "Wouldn't want your girl to slip." Sarah's pulse roared in her ears. She remembered Adeline's words, "The mountain will keep what men cannot steal." She moved. It wasn't thought. It was instinct, raw and wild. She lunged forward, shoulders first, grabbing the barrel. The gun went off. The sound split the air like a thunderclap. Lila screamed. Sarah felt the burn across her arm before she saw the blood. Boone staggered but didn't fall. He swung the pistol again, snarling. Sarah hit him with everything she had. They crashed into the control plate. Blood sprayed, hers and Lila's both, splattering across the metal lines. The tower went silent. Then the floor began to move. The blue light flared blinding white. The hum turned into a deep, rolling growl. The walls shuddered. Boone stumbled back, eyes wide. "What the hell did you?" The ground split beneath them. It didn't crumble like rock. It opened. Slow, deliberate, as if something beneath the ridge had been waiting for this exact moment. A wind rose from the gap, cold enough to steal her breath, carrying with it the smell of rain on iron and the echo of voices that weren't human. Sarah grabbed Lila and pulled her close. The floor yawned open before them, revealing a vast cavern lit from within. It wasn't man-made. It wasn't even natural. The walls were alive with veins of glowing metal, star iron, bending and pulsing like arteries, bathing everything in soft, radiant blue. Boone fell to his knees at the edge, staring into the depths. "God Almighty," he whispered. Sarah looked down too, heart pounding. What she saw wasn't a mine. It was a cathedral, the mountain's heart, carved by something older than time. Columns of luminous stone reached into darkness, and from below came the sound of water, or maybe breath, steady and ancient. Boone turned toward her, face twisted with awe and greed. "Do you know what this is worth?" She shook her head slowly. "Do you?" He pointed the gun again, hand trembling. "You'll show me how to control it, or I swear." Before he could finish, the hum rose to a scream. The light exploded outward, engulfing them both. Sarah shielded Lila's face as a blast of wind hurled them back against the wall. The tower groaned, its stones grinding like gears. Boone's pistol flew from his hand and clattered into the abyss below. When the light dimmed, Sarah opened her eyes. Boone was still there, alive, dazed, but the control plate was gone, swallowed by the opening. The floor was whole again, smooth and solid, as if nothing had ever happened. Only the faintest hum lingered, low and steady, like the heartbeat of the ridge itself. Lila stirred in her arms, whispering through tears, "Mama, the mountain's awake." Sarah held her tight, staring into the still glowing cracks that traced across the floor. Boone had come for treasure. What he found was something older than mining. Something alive. Something that had just decided it was done, being hidden. The ground hadn't stopped humming since the night of the fire. Even after the snow melted and the ash cooled, Sarah could still feel the vibration running through her boots. Slow, steady, alive. The mountain had a heartbeat now, and it was loud enough to drown out fear. 3 days after Christmas, the wind changed. It came down the ridge with the smell of thawing pine and wet earth, carrying a kind of warning that only those who belonged to the land could understand. Sarah sat at the edge of the cavern, staring into the glow below. The shaft that had opened under the tower no longer looked like a wound. It breathed like a living thing. Veins of star iron ran through the walls, pulsing like arteries under translucent skin. Light moved in waves, humming low, bending sound until it seemed the air itself could sing. Lila slept beside her, head in Sarah's lap, exhausted. The girl had barely spoken since that night. Sometimes she woke crying, saying the mountain whispered her name. Sarah brushed a lock of hair from her forehead and whispered back, "I know, baby. I hear it too." A voice echoed from behind them. "You're lucky it's whispering and not screaming." Sarah's hand went straight to the shotgun. The figure that stepped out of the shadows raised both hands. "Easy now," Jasper Flint said, smiling that same half-smile she'd once wanted to break off his face. "You shoot me. You'll regret it before you even rack the next shell." "I already regret not doing it the first time," Sarah said. "You sent a drone through my window." "I did," Jasper admitted. "But not to hurt you, to scare off the Whitfords. They were closing in faster than I could stall them. I figured a little chaos might slow their hand." She studied him. His clothes were torn, his left arm bandaged, and the cocky glint in his eye had dulled into something closer to guilt. "Why are you here?" "Because you're running out of time," he said. "Boone's not done. He's gathering men, family, hired guns, whoever he can buy, and he's bringing proof to the corporations sniffing around the ridge. You think he wants gold? He wants ownership. He hands them evidence of that metal, and by spring they'll have bulldozers crawling up this mountain." Sarah's stomach turned. "And you? Whose side are you on?" He hesitated, then motioned toward the tunnel mouth. "Why don't you ask her?" Footsteps echoed from deeper in the cavern, measured, confident. A woman emerged, lantern in hand. Her coat was long, dark wool, the kind city professors wore in photographs. Her eyes, though, were pure mountain, sharp and sad like someone who'd spent her life looking for ghosts. "Dr. Marisol Reed," she said, voice steady. "Harvard anthropology, technically, but that's not why I'm here." She glanced at Sarah. "Ashwood, on my mother's side." Sarah blinked. "Your family," Marisol said softly. "Distant, but yes. I've been tracing the bloodline for years. You're the first to open the hollow since Adeline." Sarah's throat tightened. "How do you know about her?" Marisol lifted the lantern, letting the blue light catch her face. "Because every generation, one of us is drawn back. My mother had dreams, letters, symbols, songs she couldn't explain. I used to think they were just stories. Then I found Adeline's journals. The last line said, 'The hollow will choose who it remembers.'" The cavern's hum deepened, echoing her words. Lila stirred awake, eyes catching the glow. "It's remembering now," she whispered. Sarah held her close, then turned back to the strangers. "You said corporations. What do they know?" "Enough to be dangerous," Jasper said. "Star iron isn't on any scientific chart. It bends light, reshapes magnetic fields. You can't burn it or break it. Somebody down at Titan Minerals got wind of a sample pulled from an old Whitford shaft. They're offering millions for the vein." "Then Boone isn't just chasing family pride," Sarah muttered. "He's chasing a payday big enough to buy God." A new voice came from the shadows. "He won't stop until he gets it." Sarah turned sharply. A man stepped out from behind the stone column. Tall, broad-shouldered, his hair peppered with gray, eyes the color of old steel. He wore a blacksmith's apron over a wool shirt, hands rough and burned. "Caleb Whitford," he said quietly. "Boone's nephew." Sarah raised her shotgun again. "I've had my fill of Whitfords." Caleb didn't flinch. "So have I." He knelt, picked up a small chunk of star iron and held it to his ear. "You hear that?" he asked. "It's singing. My granddaddy used to tell me only Ashwood blood could hear it clear, but I got a trace of it too. Enough to know this stuff ain't meant to be sold." Marisol nodded. "He helped me find this place," she said. "He's not Boone's man anymore." Caleb's jaw tightened. Boone used to be family. Now he's a fever that needs breaking. For a moment nobody spoke. The cavern breathed around them, light shifting, walls pulsing like muscle. Sarah looked from one face to the next, realizing the truth of it. Boone had his army of greed, and somehow she had hers. She set the shotgun down. "If Boone's bringing men, we need to be ready." Jasper grinned faintly. "That's the spirit. I've got maps, fake ones mostly, but enough to send him in circles while we prep the real ground. There's an access tunnel below the ridge where we can bottleneck them." Marisol spread a stack of old survey papers on the rock floor. "We need to seal the lower shafts before they blast through. The mountain's veins are unstable. If they hit one wrong, they'll wake it all the way," Caleb finished grimly. Lila stepped forward, staring down into the glowing pit below. "It's already awake," she said. "It just hasn't chosen yet." Her words sent a chill through everyone. Sarah bent down, met her daughter's eyes. "And how do you know that, baby?" Lila touched her chest. "Because it hums inside me now." No one argued. That night, they built a small camp in the upper chamber, using the tower's old furniture for firewood. The blue light pulsed against the stone like slow lightning. Every few minutes, a gust of warm air rose from the cavern, breathing, steady. Boone's voice haunted Sarah's memory. "You'll show me how to control it." Control. That was the word men always used when they didn't understand something alive. As dawn crept down the ridge, Jasper returned from a lookout above, breath clouding in the cold. "He's coming," he said. "2 trucks, maybe 3. Boone and a handful of armed men. Looks like they mean to take the ridge before nightfall." Sarah stood, tightening her coat. "Let them try." Marisol looked at her, a question in her eyes. "You're not running?" Sarah shook her head. "I've been running since I was 17, from debt, from men like him, from ghosts I didn't even know had my name." She walked to the tower window. The first sunlight touched the ridge, lighting the ice like glass. The mountains shimmered faintly blue. "This time," she said, voice steady, "I'm standing my ground." The cavern below rumbled in answer, soft but sure, as if the ridge itself approved. Boone Whitford might bring his guns, his greed, his men, but the hollow light had already made its choice, and for the first time in her life, Sarah Mae Jenkins wasn't afraid to fight back. February 1st came like a breath before spring, cold enough to bite, but with that thin sweetness that told the mountain winter was almost done fighting. The old folks down in the valley called it a turning day, the halfway point between dark and light. Up on Blackthorn Knob, the hollow light pulsed blue against the snow. The tower no longer looked abandoned, it looked awake. Beneath it, the cavern glowed like a living heart, veins of star iron running deep under the ridge, humming in slow rhythm. Sarah Mae Jenkins stood at the mouth of that cavern, coat collar pulled tight, dynamite fuses coiled over her shoulder like a rope. Beside her, Caleb Whitford checked the charges, each one stolen from Boone's own quarry site. His hands moved sure and calm, the way only a man raised around fire could move. "You sure about this?" he asked. Sarah nodded. "You can't reason with greed. You bury it." Jasper Flint crouched by the lanterns, tightening the last detonator. He looked rougher now, beard growing wild, guilt carved deep into his face. "Boone's bringing at least 15 men," he said. "Militia types. Rifles, floodlights, gas masks. They think they're storming a gold mine." "They're walking into a tomb," Caleb said. In the shadows behind them, Lila stepped forward. Her arm was still bandaged from the Christmas Eve gunshot, but she carried herself like someone older, eyes too steady, voice too soft for the storm around her. In her hands, wrapped in cloth, was the crystal heart of the vein, a fist-sized shard of living star iron that pulsed brighter whenever she breathed near it. "I'm not hiding," she said. Sarah turned. "Baby." "No." Lila held the crystal up. It listens to me. It wants to see how this ends. Marisol Reed, standing nearby with her field satchel and calm professor's poise, gave a small nod. She's right. The mountain responds to choice, not fear. You try to cage a gift, you break it. Jasper frowned. Great philosophy, Doc, but Boone's not coming to talk. From far up the tunnel, faint light flashed. The echo of engines. They're here, Caleb said. Sarah looked at her daughter, at the crystal, at the web of glowing veins that spread across the cavern floor like lightning frozen mid-strike. Then she took a deep breath. We sticked to the plan. They arranged themselves across the chamber, Sarah near the dynamite triggers, Caleb at the backup fuse, Marisol by the passageway. Jasper stayed hidden among the shadows, rifle across his knees. Lila stood at the natural pedestal of stone where the veins converged, the crystal heart in her hands. The hum deepened. The star iron veins began to glow brighter, as if aware of the approaching footsteps. Boone Whitford's voice carried through the tunnel first, rough, triumphant. Come out, Jenkins! No more games! Then came the men, rifles, hard hats, and floodlights that cut through the blue haze. Boone led them, eyes wild, a bandage still wrapped around his right hand from where the gun had burned him. Well, well, he said, sweeping his light across the cavern. The prodigal daughter and her freak show. Didn't I tell you I'd find what's mine? Sarah didn't move. You don't own this, Boone. You never did. Boone laughed. You think I care about ownership? This ain't about family trees or ghost stories. It's about what's under our feet. That metal, your star iron, it's the future. Power, wealth. You could have had a piece of it, sweetheart, but now, he lifted his pistol. Now it's mine. He pointed at Lila. Give me the crystal. Lila stepped forward, calm as if the mountain itself steadied her. Her small voice carried clear across the chamber. You want the mountain's heart? She set the crystal on the stone pedestal. Earn it. Boone sneered. Don't tempt me, little witch. He lunged. The crystal split. Not shattered, fractured like a heartbeat breaking in two. Light roared out in a wave that hit every man in the room. Floodlights burst. Rifles clanged to the ground. The star iron veins blazed white-blue, bright enough to blind. The air filled with heat and sound that wasn't sound at all. It was voices, hundreds layered together, singing and crying and warning all at once. Shapes began to appear in the glow, figures made of smoke and shimmer, women in old dresses, girls in bonnets, mothers holding babies, Ashwood women, every one of them, spanning generations back to the first who'd bled into the ridge. Their faces flickered between sorrow and strength, their voices rising like a choir. Blood given freely opens. Blood taken dies. Boone stumbled backward, eyes wide. What the hell is this? Sarah couldn't speak. She fell to her knees, hands shaking, tears streaming down her soot-streaked face. The ghosts weren't haunting. They were watching, waiting for something to finish. Boone raised his pistol and fired. The bullet vanished before it hit the nearest ancestor. The light bent around it, swallowed it whole. The women's song grew louder. Lila reached for her mother's hand. It's choosing. The cavern walls began to move. The veins thickened, flowing like molten glass. Star iron rose from the floor, weaving itself into a translucent barrier between Boone and the rest of them. His men screamed, scrambling for the exit, but the way out was closing. Liquid metal cooling into unbreakable walls. Sarah! Jasper shouted. Now! She reached for the detonator, but before she could press it, the mountain did it for her. The crystal heart pulsed one final time. The star iron veins surged. The air turned blinding white. When the light faded, the cavern was silent. The hum was gone. On Sarah's side of the barrier stood Caleb, Marisol, Jasper, and Lila, shaken but alive. On the other side, trapped alone in the sealed chamber, stood Boone Whitford, hands pressed against the cooling wall, face lit by the faint blue glow of everything he'd tried to steal. He was alive. And that was worse. Because through the translucent wall, he could see the heart of the mountain pulsing, inches from his fingertips, forever out of reach. The light dimmed, softening back to its steady, rhythmic glow. Lila leaned her head against Sarah's shoulder. It chose, she whispered. Sarah nodded. It did. Behind the wall, Boone began to scream, hoarse, desperate. The sound echoed once, then died into the mountain's long exhale. The hollow light had spoken. The mountain had chosen its side. And this time it wasn't Boone's. Spring came late that year, shy and uncertain, as if the mountain was testing whether it was safe to breathe again. Oh, the snow melted slow, trickling down the ridges in silver streams. Smoke stains still marked the stones of the old cottage, black fingerprints left behind by fire and loss. But the tower, the hollow light, stood strong, alive. The lens at the top had been rebuilt piece by piece. Caleb had done most of it himself, melting star iron splinters and welding them into a new frame that caught sunlight by day and stored it like a secret. By night, it flared to life, a solar-guided beacon that washed the ridge in soft blue light. People in town started calling it an observatory. They said the Whitford curse was broken. They said a miracle lived up on that hill. But Sarah never corrected them. Some truths worked better as rumors. She'd spent the winter quietly filing papers, driving back and forth between county offices with a borrowed briefcase and a courage she didn't know she had. The Ashwood Hollow Institute, nonprofit, educational, community-based, a place where Appalachian kids with the gift could come without being shamed, hunted, or medicated into silence. By April, the first letters came in. A boy in Virginia who dreamed of storms before they struck. A girl in Kentucky who said she could hear iron crying beneath the soil. A 12-year-old from Boone County who painted the future and didn't know why. Sarah read every letter twice, her heart breaking and mending all at once. They would come here. They would be safe here. The hollow would not hide anymore. Lila was the first to test the new forge. Caleb guided her hands steady as she shaped her first key, a rough little star iron charm carved from the cooled veins of the ridge. When she held it to the light, it shimmered faintly blue. "What's it for?" Caleb asked, wiping soot from his palms. Lila grinned, that same spark her mother had once carried behind weary eyes. "It's for opening things that aren't supposed to open." Sarah laughed, though her voice cracked. "She gets that from me." Caleb stayed, though she never asked him to. He took over the old smithy on the lower slope, reforging Whitford iron into something kinder. He made wedding bands, promise rings, protection charms, each one with a sliver of star iron at its heart. He called them mountain vows. Jasper Flint stayed too, though his camera crew never came back. The last footage he'd shot, the fire, the tower, the blue light, had been quietly erased. He said the world wasn't ready for it. Maybe it never would be. Marisol Reed returned to Boston for a time, only to send word months later that the Geological Survey was buried under layers of classified paperwork. No one in government could find the sample she'd logged, and the corporation funding Boone's obsession had quietly pulled out. "We bought you time," her letter said. "Use it well." And they did. By summer, grass grew over the ruins of the cottage. The soil there never stopped smelling faintly of smoke and iron, but wildflowers pushed through anyway, stubborn, bright, alive. Sarah built a new cabin beside the tower, smaller but warmer, every board nailed with her own hands. Sometimes at night, she stood in the doorway where her old life had burned away and her new one began. The wind came down from the ridge, carrying frog song and pine and that faint hum of the mountains still alive beneath her feet. On clear nights, when the sky turned black as coal and the stars cut sharp as glass, the hollow light burned blue. Its glow drifted down through the valley like a lantern for the lost. Truckers on the interstate swore they saw it from miles away, an unregistered beacon that pulsed steady through fog and rain. Hikers said they followed it once and found a note tied to a tree that read, "You're almost home." And in town, they whispered stories. That if you were hurting, if you were alone, if you had nowhere left to go, that light would find you. They said it was magic. They were half right. Sarah Mae Jenkins stood in the doorway one night, Lila asleep inside, the tower glowing steady above. She traced the curve of a ring on her finger, a band Caleb had forged from a star iron tear. It hummed faintly, almost like a heartbeat. She thought of Adeline Ashwood, of the letters in the pie safe, the locket, the prophecy. When the hollow light burns blue, the lost child returns, and the mountain chooses sides. Now she understood. The treasure was never the metal. It wasn't the gold, or the mine, or the fortune Boone had died chasing from inside his glass tomb. It was the chain, the unbroken line of women who hid their daughters long enough for one of them to grow up and fight back. That was the inheritance. That was the miracle. Sarah looked out over the ridge where blue light touched every blade of grass, every rusted car hood, every unmarked grave that had fed the soil. The mountain wasn't hiding anymore. It was singing. A deep, Low note that started in the earth and moved through her bones, through Lila's dreams, through the wind that carried it down to the sleeping towns below. A hymn, a warning, a promise. And under that endless Appalachian sky, Sarah Mae Jenkins finally smiled. Not the tired kind, not the fighting kind, but the kind that knows peace is a choice you have to earn. The hollow light burned blue against the dark, and somewhere in the valley, a lost soul lifted their head and began walking toward it. The mountain had found its voice, and it was calling people home.